History has a convenient way of simplifying the narrative of genius. It likes solitary figures, men standing alone on the precipice of discovery, pulling fire from the gods. We are taught that Fritz Haber was one such man, a complex titan who pulled nitrogen from the air to feed the world and unleashed chlorine on the battlefield to destroy it. But in the shadow of this titan stood another mind, equally brilliant, equally fierce, but systematically silenced by the very man she loved. History erased her name, burying her under the suffocating title of wife. Her name was Clara Immerwahr, and her story is not just a tragedy, it is an indictment of a world that chose to extinguish a light rather than let it shine. To understand the magnitude of her erasure, we must first understand the height from which she fell. Born in 1870 on a farm near Breslau, Clara was never meant to be a footnote. In an era when women were expected to cultivate nothing more than a pleasant demeanor and a well-kept home, Clara cultivated a hunger for the fundamental truths of the universe. She didn't just study chemistry, she conquered it. In 1900, she achieved what was deemed impossible for her gender. She became the first woman to earn a Ph.D. in physical chemistry from the University of Breslau, magna cum laude. She wasn't merely intelligent, she was a pioneer, shattering a glass ceiling that most women didn't even know existed. She stood on equal footing with the greatest scientific minds of her generation, a woman who had forced the heavy doors of academia open through sheer force of intellect. It was this brilliance that attracted Fritz Haber. They had met years earlier at a dance, but it was their shared passion for chemistry that rekindled their connection. When they married in 1901, Clara believed she was entering a partnership of equals. She envisioned a life where the laboratory and the home were extensions of the same shared existence, where they would unlock the secrets of matter together. Haber, charismatic and ambitious, surely fed this dream during their courtship. But the moment the ring was on her finger, the doors she had fought so hard to open began to close, one by one. The betrayal of her potential didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing suffocation. The partnership was a lie. As Fritz's career skyrocketed, fueled by an obsessive drive for recognition, Clara was relegated to the domestic sphere. The Ph.D., the years of grueling research, the brilliant thesis on the solubility of metal salts, all of it was dismissed as a charming backstory to her new role as Frau Haber. She became the housekeeper, the hostess, the mother. When she did touch science, it was only to serve him. She translated his works into English, her superior linguistic skills reduced to a tool for his advancement. She proofread his lectures, her mind sharpening his arguments, while her own voice withered. In a letter to her former mentor, the pain of her erasure is palpable. She wrote, "It has always been my attitude that a life has only been worth living if one has made full use of all one's abilities and tried to live out every kind of experience human life has to offer." She was watching her own life become unworthy by her own definition. She saw Fritz not as a partner, but as a consuming force. Fritz's overpowering manner asserts itself more than ever in his home and marriage, she confessed, confessing that her own personality was being destroyed. She was a caged eagle, forced to watch a vulture soar. And yet, this domestic tragedy was only the prelude. The true horror was yet to come, not in the kitchen, but on the battlefield, where her husband's genius would turn monstrous. If the death of her scientific ambition was a slow strangulation, the corruption of her moral universe was a violent collision. As the world marched blindly toward the Great War in 1914, the scientific community was swept up in a wave of nationalist fervor. But while others saw patriotism, Fritz Haber saw opportunity. He was no longer content with being a celebrated chemist. He wanted to be a war hero. He dedicated his institute to the German military effort, turning his brilliance toward the most efficient methods of killing. He became the father of chemical warfare, a title he wore with chilling pride. Clara watched this transformation with absolute horror. For her, science was a sacred pursuit, a tool to understand the natural world and improve the human condition. To twist it into a weapon of mass destruction was a sacrilege. She was not a passive observer. As Fritz developed the concept of cloud gas attacks, releasing chlorine gas from cylinders to drift over enemy trenches, Clara stood as the lone voice of reason in a chorus of madness. She publicly condemned his work, calling it a perversion of the ideals of science. It was a dangerous stance. In a Germany intoxicated by war propaganda, her dissent was viewed as treasonous. But Clara didn't care about the state. She cared about the soul of humanity and the soul of the man she had married. The conflict in the Haber household grew venomous. Fritz dismissed her moral objections as the hysterical weakness of a woman who didn't understand the hard necessities of war. He argued that gas would end the war quickly, saving countless lives in the long run, a twisted logic that dictators and warmongers have used for centuries. He accused her of being a traitor to the fatherland. The intellectual respect that had arguably existed was gone, replaced by contempt. He saw a nagging wife. She saw a monster in a lab coat. She pleaded with him to stop, to remember the oath of preserving life, but he was deaf to everything but the roar of the cannons and the applause of the generals. The ultimate betrayal came in the spring of 1915. Fritz Haber personally traveled to the front lines at Ypres, Belgium, to oversee the first major deployment of his weapon. On April 22nd, the wind turned and he gave the order. More than 160 tons of chlorine gas were released. The result was a hellscape previously unimagined. Thousands of French and Algerian soldiers clawed at their throats, drowning on dry land as their lungs dissolved. It was a massacre that changed the nature of warfare forever. And then he came home. Fritz returned to Berlin not in shame, but in triumph. He was promoted to the rank of captain, celebrated as the savior of the German offensive. He was ecstatic, completely insulated from the moral atrocity he had orchestrated. For Clara, this was the breaking point. She looked at her husband and saw the blood of thousands on his hands. The man she had loved, the scientist she had admired, was gone. In his place stood a war criminal feted by society. The isolation was absolute. The university, the government, their friends, everyone applauded the gas. She alone saw the green mist for what it was, the death of civilization. She had tried logic, she had tried pleading, she had tried anger. Nothing had worked. The power couple of chemistry had become diametrically opposed forces. One representing the absolute corruption of knowledge, the other representing its desperate, dying conscience. The night of May 1, 1915 was a scene of grotesque contrast. In the Haber Villa in Berlin, a dinner party was in full swing. Guests raised their glasses to toast Fritz Haber, the hero of Ypres. Laughter rang out, mingling with the clinking of fine crystal. Fritz was the center of attention, basking in the adoration of his peers, boasting of the efficiency of his gas and his imminent departure to the Eastern Front to oversee more attacks against the Russians. Upstairs, or perhaps silently moving through the shadows of the garden, Clara Immerwahr walked alone. She had reached the end of her endurance. Every cheer from the dining room below must have felt like a physical blow. The world had gone mad, and she was trapped in the epicenter of the insanity. She had failed to stop him with words. She had failed to stop him with reason. Now she would try the only language left to her, the language of ultimate sacrifice. She found Fritz's service revolver, the weapon of an officer, a symbol of the militarism she despised. She didn't go to him to beg one last time. That time had passed. She walked out into the cool night air of the garden, perhaps looking up at the stars that chemistry had taught her were made of the same matter as herself. She positioned the heavy pistol against her chest, aiming for the heart that had broken 1,000 times over the last few years. She pulled the trigger.